So it's great to see everybody coming on a Tuesday afternoon. I'm pretty excited to be here. So, for anyone who doesn't know me personally yet, I'm Laura Atherton with Real Laura Coaching and Strategies. We started our Unlock Success events about a year ago now, and really just about trying to bring together like minded individuals that are interested in real estate so that we can share that information, hopefully, so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. My husband and I have been investing in real estate for over 15 years, mostly in Calgary, long-term rental style. We do some multifamily, some joint ventures, a number of different styles, equating us to just over 80 doors currently. But short term is new for us. So I'm really excited to have an expert on with me today, especially an expert that could tell us a little bit about the Canmore market as well. So I'm so glad, Michelle, if you could share a little bit of an introduction about yourself and then we'll get right into it.
Thanks a lot for inviting me today. My name's Michelle Goddick, and I come to real estate from a little bit of a different perspective in that I work in maybe mainly the mountain towns, right? Like the foothills in Bragg Creek, and I work out of the office in Canmore. And so kind of what brings me to real estate is love of lifestyle. I love being in the mountains, and that's where I play, that's where I socialize. And I come from a background of working with people. So bringing those two together is kind of where my passion lies.
I just love that you said that just out of the gate because I think part of the reason why many of us are here, I know for myself, as far as my interest in real estate, is about lifestyle, really. Like I could talk about how much I may or may not love properties, but really what I really like is what that does for my lifestyle. I think that's what a lot of people joining and coming out to our event on the 9th as well will be around, how can real estate change their life? But also I like your different spin on real estate investing and lifestyle can actually be together. And that's not something that I've done before.
Yeah, I just find that where I live and where I recreate creates the life that I want to live. And so the people that I work with are generally interested in those kind of things and what it can bring. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're an ice climber. It might mean that you really like the shopping in Canmore and you like being surrounded by the beauty, because even that um, brings us joy, right?
So much joy. I mean, I just love the opportunity being quite a long time ago of an implant from Ontario, 22 years ago now, I think. I just don't think I'll still get over it. We had the great opportunity of my mom moving out here a couple of years ago now, and Canmore is absolutely her favorite place to go, right? It can't get old.
It has so much to offer, and it's a really unique um, demographic. It's a unique area, and it's unique in how it responds to the different markets. Although it's close to Calgary, close to the airport, the market is totally different there. And part of that is because it's located in a national park. And so there isn't the opportunity to expand. And so what we know about markets is there's demand and there's inventory. And in Canmore, the inventory can't keep up with demand because it's just such a unique jewel in the middle of the mountains that you can't really get in too many other places.
That's amazing. And I think that's, even when you and I've chatted briefly a little bit, just scratching the surface before, it's all new to me. And I'm excited. I know we're going to have you for a longer period at the live event on November 9th. So anybody checking in now, or if you're watching this on the replay, do make sure that you use the QR code here in my background or reach out to us about the full event. I know there's going to be tons that we can learn, but what can you share just to touch on our understanding? Like if I was to be a brand new investor looking at, like, if I called you up today and said, okay, Michelle, I want to buy a short-term rental in Canmore, what would be the first thing you would say to me?
The first thing that I usually help people understand, because it's very different in Canmore, is that you can't just buy any property in Canmore and decide to rent it out short term. And
Okay.
that because it's a tourist destination and they're still trying to keep the balance of a community and a residential town and where people live as well, because that creates a dynamic that people want to come to. They've had rules in place for quite a while. And so there's only certain areas that you can actually purchase as an investment for short term rentals. And it doesn't even mean just that building is short-term rental, and that's not. We actually have condo complexes where one floor is short-term, one floor is long-term, and one floor is a mix, right?
Okay.
And so it's really important that you work with a Canmore realtor that can help you understand what is even available, like what you're allowed to purchase. And it's also different in the areas surrounding Canmore. So we think of ourselves as the whole Bow Valley corridor. But for instance, if you were thinking, oh, but I really like Banff too, uh, no one is actually allowed to have hotel condos in Banff. There's no zoning for it, there's no rule for it. You can't do it. Right. And then if you went just 5 minutes the other side towards Calgary, there's Deadman's Flats. And there are short-term rentals there as well. And there's some mixed zoning where you can live in a property, have a long-term rental, and have a short-term rental attached to your property. So in Canmore, if you had a short-term rental, you could have stays for up to 30 days. But if you go 5 minutes farther east into Deadman's Flats, then you're allowed to have short-term rentals up to 75 days. So there's a lot of different information that it's important that you're connecting with somebody that's working in Canmore, in one of the Canmore offices that has that kind of information at hand.
And how important is like the difference of the amount of days? So coming as a real estate investor, when you say things like up to 30 days or up to 75 days, I'm thinking, well, I'm probably looking for people who are wanting to book for the weekend. So, what is the difference? Are there minimums? Like, what other things should I be wondering about when I'm looking at that area?
Well, people that buy in Canmore typically um, are looking at it as an investment, but a lot of people come to it as somewhere that they also want to stay. So it's a way to make some money and to have a vacation property in a market that has great appreciation. And when you look at it like that, some people are like, oh, well, I want to stay for the summer, or I want to stay
Okay.
for the ski season. Or I met many people that rent a property for 2 months in the summer so that they have a place. It's like we don't really have the lake cottages in Alberta, but it's like that mountain getaway.
Excellent. And so obviously understanding the zoning, understanding where you could, like you said, I thought that was very interesting that there could be a condo where it's allowed on certain floors and not other floors. Do you have, what are your thoughts on, future risk of shutting down further? Like as Canmore sounds like they're pretty set on what's allowed in certain areas. Are there risks for investors about them, changing their mind and actually shutting them down?
I think actually it does the opposite because I mean places like Vancouver, where there was my understanding of it, I'm not a Vancouver realtor, was that a lot of people were seeing the benefits of short-term rentals, were moving in that direction, and then they were worried about where local people could stay. Like they started to create a deficit of rentals for people that are cleaning and cooking for the tourists that are coming and staying in those. Where Canmore has always been primarily a tourist destination. And so the town getting in ahead and putting in the zoning, it's always been front of mind there. And it's something they're always working towards to ensure that there's enough rental. And so most people, if they own a business in Canmore, they're also building staff residence
Awesome.
and making
That's
sure that
fantastic.
that's, yeah.
I really like that what you've shared on the difference on kind of the eye on, what the needs are for the community and for tourism as a front end in Canmore. I think that is very different than what we're seeing in other towns. And the fact of looking at like staff residents as part of a portion that they're already kind of creating or having in that zoning. So would would I be safe to say if I worked with an expert like you, and there was what kind of supply is available? If I'm to say to you, I'm interested in doing this type of thing specifically in Canmore, is it a long waiting list? Are people beating down? Like how many properties are coming available that are actually in the right zoning to be able to use as short-term rentals?
There's quite a lot on the market all the time.
Okay.
And just because there's that balance and it's part of the market in Canmore. It's a big part of the market. I mean, it's enough of a part of the market. It's just I feel like if I don't say this, I'll forget to say it later. That in Canmore, we actually have our own database to help people search for properties. And so instead of you going through realtor.ca or Alberta's, like the Calgary area database and search for properties, in Canmore, we have a database where we can set you up so that you can see only the properties that are investment properties. And so we call those many things. I see that the STR is what you call them in Calgary, and in Canmore, we call them short-term rentals, we call them Airbnbs, hotel condo, and visitor accommodation.
Okay.
There's another one that I'm not going to talk about today, but that gives you more flexibility, but it's kind of in flux and a little more complicated. But there is always lots on the market, and it kind of depends where your price point is and where you want to come in. I've met a lot of investors that are like, primarily this is an investment property. And then when we came down to it, they wanted to have an investment property where they could sit on the deck and see the mountains and have a drink at the end of the day, and paid an extra $400,000 for it.
Right. Yeah.
Because so that's kind of the balance that we're trying to find a place where people are wanting to make the most return on investment, and also a place that when they go, they can feel like they're coming home.
Well, and even a mix of any return on investment when you're talking about lifestyle. I mean, think about how many people are purchasing that cottage or that lake house or that other property. I mean, this essentially, they're not making any money on those. So if we're absolutely able to match something where you're able to actually utilize it, and I think that's where short-term investments, Airbnbs, visitor lodging, all these kinds of things kind of came out so that it could support generally a small investor. Although I'm assuming there's quite a few larger investors in the area as well that are doing a significant amount of these types of properties.
Oh, for sure. There's definitely people that will buy them or buy into a new build and then sell them as soon as they're closed, and move around. And there's different benefits to each side. So I generally sit down and meet with somebody and find out what their needs are and show them a bit of the market. And with looking at what's on the market at that time, pulling out some of the properties that are going to have the best return on investment for their price point, and then do the math for them so that they can see what all the fees are, what their choices are that they're making, and where it can go from there. But there's also different areas. Like if Deadman's Flats is 5 minutes outside of Canmore, and the price point is like 100,000 less. And there's plans for a ring road to be built, and the Three Sisters owns the whole side, and it's just got out of a lawsuit. And so they're prepared to start developing now, and that'll join Canmore to Deadman's Flats. And so, you're paying 100,000 less, you charge a little less for your unit, and you still get good occupancy rates, and the opportunity for appreciation is different because it's adding amenities. It's becoming closer to Canmore.
Well, and you mentioned at the very beginning around, the fact that Canmore is unique because it is in a national park and there's limitations as far as building and all of those components. So I'm assuming then when looking at outskirts like Deadman's Flats or looking at that other piece you mentioned around new builds, I mean, obviously it sounds like there's always so much capacity in that space as well. Are we worried about stuff running out? Like, is it going to be completely saturated, or what's the market looking like on that side?
But what we see is that we can't keep up with demand.
Okay.
Right. And there's just Three Sisters has that part done. And then what's the other side called? The name's escaping me right now, but it's the north side of the highway. Silvertip. Silvertip has some higher ends, and they've got a huge development going in there. But typically those are already bought up, and all the land that's available has already been bought. And so what you're seeing in Canmore now is the community's aged, and so some of the older homes are being taken down and rebuilt. We have our office has just finished a 105 condo unit that's zoned for hotel condo in Deadman's Flats, and we own another piece of land that is going to accept new builds. Like it's in development, the water, the sewer is being approved, and we're thinking come February we'll be opening a reservation list. So there are a few new builds, but most of them in Canmore are looking at renovations, or they're in the Three Sisters, or they're up at Silvertip.
Wow. Well, it sounds very exciting. I mean, like we said, we know it's a beautiful place. So tell me a little bit. Again, I'm coming from a Calgary-based long-term real estate background, right? All of our properties, we have like minimum 1 year leases, not to mention, we like our tenants to stay even longer. So this is like completely different. So when we look at occupancy rates and things like that, like I'm assuming there's some boom and bust kind of thing based on the timeline. If there's so many of these types of properties in the Canmore and surrounding area, what happens in, or is there an off season?
Yes, there is an off season. If you're looking at year round, your occupancy rate, like conservatively, depending on who's doing your property management, is around 74%. So the high season is from the beginning of June to the end of September, and the occupancy rate there is like 98%.
Okay. So, I mean, really, if someone is being smart and being conservative with their numbers, and again, that's where I kind of usually come in as well, as I'm a numbers girl. So when I'm doing my coaching strategy with any investors, when I'm working with people one-on-one, or if they're going through some of our programs that want to get involved in real estate investing, I mean, our number one component always is kind of looking at that ROI, or that cash flow. Now, this is a little bit different because, like you said, we're combining lifestyle. So if we were looking at a budget of vacation at X amount of dollars that you were going to kind of do annually in the Canmore area, you combining that in with the occupancy rate. I mean, I'm seeing that you can use some good conservative numbers, and you think that it would be fairly reliable as far as like being able to look at that, let's even say 70% occupancy rate if you looked at annually.
Yeah, well, 74 is actually conservative.
Okay,
Um,
74 is
but it
conservative. Yeah.
but it really does depend on who you use for property management. So that's a big thing. We don't have to get into all of that today, because I know we'll get into that more. But in Canmore, how they do is like there's a few buildings that you can only be in the rental pool that the company that's doing the property management. One is they have the rule, but it's been challenged in court and hasn't held up. And another one is pretty firm. So it kind of depends. But most of them in Canmore, you can hire your own property management company. And how they work is they charge a percentage of your profit, right? So that can be anywhere from 5 to 50% of your profit. So that makes a huge difference for investors. Now, if 5%, they might just be putting it up on a site for you, right? 50% is kind of like going to Panorama and you've got somebody at the desk handing over the keys like in a hotel, right? And they cover everything. And so there's a huge range, and it really depends. They all work super differently in that some of the companies say that you can only use your own property for a certain amount of time because they're making a percentage of your profit, so they want you to make the most profit. Where the property management company that works out of the CIR office, Angela and Doran, they own Mountaintop Rentals, and they charge 25%. And for that, they you can use the property as much as you want. They know exactly how to price in that market, how to change throughout the tourist systems, how to get you the best occupancy rates, how to furnish it, and so on and so on. They even have a quality control person that goes in after every patronage,
Yeah.
after every group of people have been through. They have, a quality control person goes through after the cleaners to make sure that everything's still in good working order and ready to rent out to the next tenant. So that can make a difference.
I mean, it makes a huge difference, and I think that's part of the whole reason why we're doing these little live sessions as well as having the full workshop event, because there's so many things to cover. And when we're looking at any component, and that's where I see the same in real estate investing, business, short term, long term, at any point, I mean, a lot of it is really around helping people make sure that they've got a strong business plan on what they're looking for. So ultimately, what are you looking for as far as location, the type of rental that you're going to do, your ROI, but then also it's the management of that business. How are we going to make sure that it's that it's being successful. What I'm hearing from you is, different buildings are going to be based on that. So some of them are going to come with that management concierge style. Some could be managed on their own, but what would that look like? I mean, we've shared that in a few of our previous series as well, is that people have set everything all up on their own, thrown it up on Airbnb, and then think that there's something, wonder why they're not getting any bookings, because there's
Mhm.
a lot more to it than that, right? And that's what we're going to share on our full day event is everything from design to zoning regulations to all of these things that I even think a full day isn't going to be enough. Like obviously it's taken you a lot longer than a day to learn all of these details, I'm sure.
Oh, for sure. And it's still constantly evolving. It's really nice to be working with a property management company right in the office because they have their finger right on the statistics and can share with me each building's occupancy rates, each building's profit margins, so that it takes the guesswork out of it because some properties make more money than other properties, but then they cost more, right? So it depends on how much money you're coming in with. That changes things quite a bit. The other thing that has been helpful is that they're willing to share that with our clients to take kind of the guesswork out of it.
That's huge. I mean, and that really is everything is looking at stats. I mean, I think there's a few things there that we know. We know that the Canmore, the mountains, people wanting to go to the mountains is not going to disappear, right? So we
Right.
obviously know people are going to want to continue going. What would you say, out of a lot of investors and people that you work with, is maybe one of their biggest fears around getting into specifically the Canmore short-term market?
I haven't had a lot of people come to me with fears.
That's great.
And so that doesn't come like an easy answer. The one thing that happens more frequently is people not realizing that the mortgages are structured differently,
Okay.
right? And so um, even if they have had good lenders, good credit, when you buy an Airbnb or short-term rental, it is totally different from long-term in that the banks will consider that income from the property when they're calculating your mortgage. Where for your very first short-term rental, they don't take that into consideration because everyone always needs a place to stay, to live in permanently, but not everybody is going to go for a holiday, right? So that changes the risk for the banks. And so for their very first hotel condo, then they need to be able to mortgage it through usually like one or two banks in Canmore, and they have to be able to hold it alone without the consideration of the profit for that unit. If they buy a second unit, then they can consider that profit. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, and I think that's a secondary piece too, is even on the taxation side on how you need to run your short-term business on your taxes, right? So we won't get into that because by all means, I don't want to butcher that. And it's a perfect segue, Michelle, because our next speaker for our next live event on the 29th is actually going to be a mortgage broker. So we'll start to kind of touch on some of that. I think there'll be very different specifics around Canmore, as you've suggested that there's specific banks in Canmore only that are looking at that, which I think also is a value because they know it, they know the market, and so when you're in that local
Mhm.
bank that understands exactly the market and all those pieces, so I think I'm excited to learn a little bit more of those details with you on the 9th. Maybe just for those of us that are on today and those that are going to be listening afterwards, is there one kind of key point, knowing that we're just going on for a short time today, that you would really want to share with anyone considering doing this kind of thing specifically in Canmore?
I think I'll put a plug in for Canmore because what happens is when people are considering Canmore, they're usually not thinking about, do I want to do a short-term rental in Canmore or do I want to do it in Calgary? They're usually thinking, do I want to do it in Canmore or do I want to do it in Panorama? Or do
Okay.
I want to do it like those are kind of the more similar markets. And then we start looking at the 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 taxes that BC uses when you purchase a property there. And we've just increased our fees for registering mortgages and and whatnot. I don't know if you know that they've like doubled in the last little while, and we didn't have them before. Like they just came out in January, and so we have
Okay.
more fees, but we don't have nearly the fees that BC has. And the other thing that's really important for these kind of like mountain destinations is that you're close to an airport, right? Like that really changes your occupancy rate if people can
Huge.
fly
Yeah.
in and get there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I super appreciate everything that you've been sharing so far. I'm going to stop our recording here and just let those that are on live to see if there's any live questions that want to be asked while we've got a few minutes left. But I certainly want to thank you for coming on with us and sharing this. I do want to remind everybody to make sure that they're checking in and joining us for the full live event here in Calgary. And that we'll be making sure that we'll have Michelle on to touch in on the Canmore segment. So yeah, I appreciate it. I'm going to stop the recording here